Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guy, Colin, and today we're talking about turning GarageBand into an analog recording studio, and better yet, for free. It's crazy, right? So this video is hinging around a plugin called the BritChannel by Analog Obsession. You can actually download that plugin completely free. There's a link in the description below. And what this plugin is doing is creating a channel strip like you would find in a professional studio inside GarageBand completely free. What a channel strip essentially is a microphone preamp that adds a little bit of character, a little bit of saturation or harmonic content to whatever it's recording. Then, in this case, it also has a little bit of EQ built into it. Now, a big part of what we're going to be talking about in this video is the EQ. And if you don't already understand EQ, then it's not going to help you nearly as much. So if you don't already have it, be sure to grab my free EQ cheat sheet from the link in the description below. That's going to help you really understand what EQ is better and get the most out of this plugin. Now, this plugin is emulating analog gear. And analog gear is something that's been in music as long as we've been recording music. Analog gear is not actually perfect. And that's actually the beauty of it. When this gear was created, they couldn't make a crystal clean microphone preamp or preamp that you're running your audio through into whatever it is you're recording. Now in GarageBand, what we can do is record through a crystal clean preamp because our technology allows for us to create that, but we lose out on some of that character that that analog gear had. Now this isn't inherently a bad thing. You've heard mixes on the radio that don't have any analog or analog emulations on them. But most music that you've heard over the span of your life has either analog gear, true analog gear, the physical piece that it was recorded through, or an emulation like this that's helping add a little bit of that character. So this isn't make or break. If you're just starting out on mixing, I literally wouldn't even worry about this video. I'd actually go watch my video on EQ, check that out. That's gonna help you a little bit more if you're just starting out. But if you've been mixing for a while and you're just trying to level up your mixes a little bit, just play around, add something new, this could help you. Now, this is a little bit outside of mixing because technically what this is emulating is something that would have been done in the recording stage, something that would have been done while you were actually recording the instruments or the sounds, whatever it is you were working on was when this would have happened. So this is something that if you follow my 6-step mixing process would actually happen before those 6 steps. This would be something in the recording phase or in the session prep stage before you start actually mixing it. But now we can emulate that inside GarageBand completely free. It's kind of amazing. So what we're gonna do in this video is first we're gonna jump into the behind the scenes of this plugin and what's happening so you understand exactly what every little knob on this plugin is and how you could start using it. Then we're gonna jump into a specific example and I'll show you how you can use this plugin to take your recorded tracks with no mixing on them from this to this. That's crazy. That's just this one plugin, and that's before we're even really mixing. Let's check it out. We're going to start by just going over what exactly this plugin does. And we're going to do that inside Logic only because Logic allows me to show you 2 plugins at the same time, and that's really going to help us look at this plugin and what the functions are actually doing. So what I've set up here is in my plugin chain, I've just have a test oscillator. This is just playing a sine wave, just a perfectly pure sound. So if I unmute it here, sounds like that. It's not something we want to have playing, so we'll keep it muted, but we can still get information from that sine wave running through this plugin. So what I've done is I've set up the BritChannel here right after that plugin and then an EQ so we can see what effect on our EQ this BritChannel is having. Now, this is pretty loud, so I've gain staged this to be pretty loud. This is really important about this plugin. If you're using any analog style plugins, then you definitely need to gain stage at least your predominant sources in your mix. So if you haven't already seen it, go watch my video on gain staging. I'll link to that above here. Now, gain staging just means sending the right amount of volume into this plugin. So again, I'm doing this a bit exaggerated here so that you can really see the effects of this plugin on this sine wave. Now, if I turn this plugin on, the BritChannel plugin over here, you'll immediately start to see a little more information. So this is here what's called harmonic content. Harmonic content is essentially a little bit of distortion. It's a very, very small amount. It's not necessarily something you would super notice but it adds a little bit of tone, a little bit of character to the source that it's on. You could go overboard and make it crazy. I'll show you an example of that when we jump into the actual song in a moment. But for now, just recognize that this is adding harmonic content. So this plugin is broken down into essentially two components. The first being the preamp section. This is the thing that in real life would be turning the mic volume or input volume of whatever source up to an audible level. And this is really where you get the character most of this plugin. So this mic volume here, the plugin developer has gain matched this, meaning that even if you turn up the volume, the gain here, it doesn't actually add any output volume. That way you can just hear what it's doing without hearing added volume to the signal. So what I want you to pay attention to is as I turn this knob, how much more harmonic content we get. That's kind of crazy, right? And it shifts a little bit depending on where it is. Crazy. It's really insane. And there's two types of distortion that come with this, saturation that come with this. The first is a mic style saturation. It's a little bit more subtle. The second is a line style saturation. It's a little bit more intense, but they just have a different character. In general, what I would largely be using this for is kind of mic preamp saturation. So I would typically leave it on this mic channel for most things that I'm going to be working on. And then you just have a trim knob, and all this is doing is turning down the output volume. That can be helpful if you do a really big boost or cut with your EQ to just make sure that it's not louder as it's leaving the plugin. And then here you just have an on-off switch. So if I turn this off here, it's essentially the same as bypassing the plugin up here. You see all the harmonic content go away. So we'll turn that back on. I'm going to set this back to 0 here. Now, the second thing that I want to do is actually just show you really what this EQ is, give you just a little bit more information about this EQ. So this is a 3-band EQ with a high-pass filter. The high-pass filter is just the exact same as this high-pass filter. And so as opposed to being able to just drag it up to a certain point here, we can just set it at specific parameters. So I would set it at specifically 50, or if I bring it up here, go up to specifically 80, or up to 160 or up to 300. So all the way up, it's going to be really high up. It's going to be cutting off a lot of frequencies. This is fixed, so you only have those individual points. But this can be helpful if you're just cutting out a little bit of that sound to start. If you're working on a snare track, you're probably not going to need anything 80 hertz or below. So you can go ahead and cut that out at the start of your signal chain. The second point here is actually a low shelf filter. So we have the high pass filter indicated here. Then we have the low pass filter indicated here. So that's the same as this low pass filter. So this is, again, going to be at fixed points. So we could set that low shelf all the way down at 35 hertz. So really, really just super sub frequencies. Set it up to 60 hertz. So a little bit higher, but still in the sub frequency range. Up again at 110 hertz. And then all the way up at 220 hertz. So it's the same thing as having this shelf on your EQ here, just built into this plugin. And along with this EQ just has a bit of a different tone. Again, it's emulating analog gear, so it's not a crystal clean EQ the same way that this would be. Even these EQ bands add a little bit of harmonic content to whatever it is you're working on. It's really subtle. In general, this is going to be kind of mid-forward, which is really good on a lot of sources to bring out presence. And then the second band we have here is the same as a bell-shaped EQ. So it's something similar to this. I don't know the exact width of it, but that is a little bit less important. And what we have here is that we can set specific frequencies. So it could be at 0.36, which is going to be equivalent to 360 hertz, or it could be up at 700 hertz, somewhere around here. It could be up at 1.6, so somewhere around here, and then up at 3.2. So again, it's fixed. So each time you switch this, you're just going to be going to those individual points. And then once you set for both of these here, once you've set the actual frequency that you want it to be affecting, so let's say we want it at 3.6 or 0.36, which is again going to be 360 hertz, we can turn it up in volume or down in volume. You'll see here, as I turn this up, you'll see some of the harmonic content around there get boosted up. And as I turn it back down, you'll see it go back down. And then if I were to go up higher and if we were to add a little bit more harmonic content in, we'll start to see more harmonic content get boosted up in those higher frequencies. So that's what this is doing here. It's going to affect your entire channel, but it's only going to be doing it at specific frequencies. And then the top here is a shelf. It's the exact same as this high shelf here, functionally speaking, but it is set at a specific frequency. So it's only impacting things from 12,000 hertz and up. So equivalent to roughly here and above, which is great for really bright, airy frequencies on sources that's good on. Okay, let's jump back over to GarageBand and look at how we can use this plugin inside GarageBand to set up our mix to sound as good as possible before we even begin mixing. Okay, so we're back inside GarageBand and we're gonna start looking at how to use this plugin to add in some of that analog character to our recordings before we go to mix. Now, as I said, it's before we go to mix. This is really something that we should be thinking about as part of the recording process, but it doesn't necessarily happen when we're recording. Unless you're using it stylistically to get a sound that you're looking for, I would typically do this actually after I've recorded. That's because this plugin is going to use a fair amount of computer processing power, and that is going to basically slow down your computer. It's going to make it harder to record. It might add some latency, some delay as you're recording. Those things are all kind of a mess. But if you want to have it on a few tracks, that's not going to be a problem. So if you're wanting to use kind of the distortion saturation effect that this plugin can do, well, I'll show you that in just a minute. You could do that on a few tracks and it probably isn't going to be a problem. But I wouldn't put it on every single track as I'm working on it. I would kind of build it up right before I start mixing. So I would record everything, I would gain stage things, I would add a little bit of this in while I'm gain staging, and then I would really start my mixing. So if you follow my 6-step mixing process, that's really when I would jump into that. But for now, let's look at how we would actually do this. So right now this is on a lot of my channels, not necessarily every single channel. If we go through here, you'll see it's on a lot of the channels listed down here, but it's not on every single one. So this rack tom gets played every once in a while in the song, but it's not really used a lot. So I'm not going to use all that computer processing power with this plugin to bring in a little bit of analog character, something that's hit once or twice in the entire song. Whereas this floor tom is being hit a lot. So I want to bring in some of that analog character to this floor tom. And in this case, it looks like I dialed in a little bit of like the sub frequencies on that floor tom with this plugin. So keep that in mind. You want to have it on enough that it's going to add some of the character in, but not necessarily everything needs it. And if you put on everything, it's going to start slowing down your computer. So I don't have it on the tambourine. I don't have it on these hand claps, but I do have it on the bass. I have it on the acoustic. I have it on the lead guitars and the rhythm guitars. Now, these are slightly different variations of that plugin. We'll talk about this in just a minute, but it's the same basic concept. I have it on the strings, all of these. So I have it on the major players in this song. Now, when it comes to how I actually set it, let's jump into that for just a second. So let's listen to this kick drum. What you want to do is start with the preamp section. We're going to just be dialing in some of that character first. Now, it's important to recognize that this can add distortion if we go overboard with it. So if we're listening to this kick drum, if I go overboard, that doesn't sound too good, right? So we want to be thoughtful with it. And for the most part, if you gain stage appropriately, anywhere from about a quarter to a third is going to be pretty healthy. But let's dial it up until we start to hear some distortion and then dial it back to about 2/3 of that. We don't want to be anywhere near distortion unless we're going for a distorted sound. So I'm definitely starting to hear some distortion around there. I'm going to go back to about half of that. We'll go somewhere around here. So yeah, as I said, somewhere in that quarter to a third range is going to be a safe bet. Now, try to see if you can notice this as I bypass it and turn it back on, off and on. You might not, right? This is where this plugin is doing something very, very small, but if you do it across your main tracks, it's going to bring in a character that these tracks just don't have on their own. So you might not necessarily notice it on individual tracks, but if you stack it across your main tracks, you're going to notice a little bit more fullness than you would have otherwise. So maybe bounce out your song, export out your song before you do this, and then do this and see if you notice kind of a harmonic difference. There definitely is tone that comes along with it. So then the second thing I would do after I've set my preamp to be at a good level is that I would start thinking, well, what can I do to enhance it? I like to think of this EQ as really an EQ to enhance, not as much to shape completely, but really broad strokes. Do I want this to have more low end, more high end? Do I really want to emphasize the crack on the snare? I'll do that with this plugin, starting to try to get into some of those areas. So on this kick, right off the bat, I think I want it to have more low end, like a little bit more impact. So kick sounds fine, but let's see if we can get some sub out of it. So what I would do is I would go to the band that makes the most sense. So in this case, since we're going for low end, we're going to be in this 35 to 220 range. I would scale this up pretty high. And then I would just start flipping through each individual one and seeing which one sounds the best to me. So we go to 35. You hear it a little bit. There's definitely some power that comes along at 60. If you're listening on good headphones, you can hear it. That's a little bit boxy to me. I skipped 110. That's a little bit boxy to me too. So I think 60 is sounding good to me. Now we want to scale it back to a range that's reasonable. Somewhere in this 5 to 6 range. Sounds good. So without and with. So now we're starting to hear some tonal differences. We're getting a little bit more impact out of that kick drum. I also want just a little bit more of that click, right? A little bit more of that cuttiness that I like on a kick drum in a rock song. So let's see. Sometimes I would do that on this band. Let's see if we can hear it on this high shelf on this one. Because it's a sample, there's no bleed from anything else. Actually, that's pretty good sound for that click to me. Okay, listen to it without and with this plugin on. It's not perfect. I might do a little bit more EQ and I'll definitely do some compression on this kick drum, but that is already a little bit closer to where I want it to be. Now, if you were to go through and do this across your entire mix, on this snare drum, for example, you'll see I did a little bit to enhance like the harmonic or the fundamental of the snare drum where it has the most impact, and then a little bit around the crack and a little bit of brightness. You'll start shaping up your mix a little bit before you even go to start mixing it. Again, think broad strokes. Don't go super specific, but can I add a little bit more of this to this track? If you're starting out, maybe even start with just, does this need more low end, more high end? Only focus on those two parameters. Maybe don't even think about this middle band here. Just focus on more low end and figure out which one, and more high end and just turn it up a little bit. Again, think it in that 3 to 6 decibel range. So you don't want to go overboard typically. You want to be doing something a little more subtle. Now, as I mentioned, I'm taking a slightly different approach on the guitars in this song. So the guitars, I'm using just the BritPre, which is basically just the preamp section, and I'm going for more of a distorted sound with this, and I'm using it to enhance the distortion from these guitars. So let's look at this example here at the end, this guitar. What I'm going for here is to use this preamp, this analog style preamp, and trying to blow it out, just make it sound crazy. And this is something the Beatles used a lot. A lot of famous guitars have done this over the years. They might not even run through an amp. In this case, I was sent a recording with an amp. So this is what it sounds like without this on. Sounds good, but I wanted something crazier. This part of the song, I mean, just listen, this part is crazy. So I really want that guitar to be growling at me, just be insane sounding. So what I did is I have the line level, because it's a little bit more intense of a distortion, and then I am just blowing it out, sending it really, really hot. Cool, right? So you can be creative with it. This is where I was saying if you wanted to use this to get some of that distortion effect as you're thinking about it, do it. Go in. This is a great plugin to really go crazy with. The other way I'm using this is on some of these, I'm actually using the low pass filter because, let's say this guitar part, I wanted to cut out some of this high-end information. So if I turn it off, I'm cutting out some of the low and some of the high, and I'm making it a really mid-range focused guitar, which gets me to a better starting point in terms of everything fitting together in this mix. So this is a super powerful tool that brings a character to your mix that just clean plugins like the built-in EQ in GarageBand aren't going to bring. Again, that's not necessarily a problem. If you set those EQs well, they can bring in a lot of great tone and really create a professional sounding mix. As I said at the top, you've heard plenty of mixes that don't use any sort of analog emulations in them or real analog gear in them. But this is just another route to add a little bit of character. And if you're working on a song that calls for it, it might be the route for you. So let me know in the comments below, is this something you think you'll try out? I think this is a really powerful tool that could really help you get this tone and this feel inside GarageBand completely free. Again, I'll link to Analog Obsession in the description below. And as I said before, if you're not even sure about the EQ section, go download that free EQ cheat sheet. It's really going to help you out to just get a better mix in the first place. And then once you start to get comfortable with mixing, maybe jump into trying some stuff like this out. Let me know in the comments below what you think. If this video is helpful, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next week with another video.